Jaime Hahn was born on October 25, 1983, growing up in Orangeburg, South Carolina. She lived with her 2 brothers and sister, Brett, Justin, and Ashley. Despite their parents' divorce and remarriage, Jaime remained a cheerful child. She attended a small yet renowned private prep school, celebrated for its educational excellence. In junior high, Jaime visited the University of North Carolina with her classmates. She instantly fell in love with the campus and aspired to attend. Even as a student, she aimed to impact others' lives by joining the board of the Center of Hope to support troubled teens. Later on, she engaged in various political campaigns. One notable campaign was Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential run, a competitor to Obama. During this campaign, Jaime emerged as a prominent figure in North Carolina's Democratic Party. During one campaign, she met Nation and formed a deep professional relationship with him that later evolved from platonic to romantic. For months after their first romantic moment, they announced their engagement and married on April 18, 2009. Their intense love was anchored in a deep friendship. Jaime and Nation thrived in their respective careers. Jaime ran her own political fundraising consulting firm, while Nation was a well-known online strategist aiding politicians and nonprofits with their campaigns. Described by friends and acquaintances as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous, the couple was well regarded. They took their marriage vows seriously and actively participated in projects like the Coalition to Protect Young Families in North Carolina. Although they were childless at that time, Jaime and Nation planned on starting a family soon. They both enjoyed vibrant social lives. Jaime was known among her friends and family as a compassionate individual who had the ability to spread happiness wherever she went. Her talent and enthusiasm for politics led many to foresee a promising future for her. However, unexpectedly, their seemingly perfect world suddenly fell apart on April 22, 2013. Around 5:20 p.m., Jaime frantically ran from her house and sprinted a few dozen meters before collapsing unconscious in a neighbor's yard. Her body was drenched in blood. Onlookers on the street were shocked by the scene and shouted for someone to call 911. A neighbor, who saw the turmoil unfolding in his yard, immediately phoned emergency services. Through Jaime's disoriented words, he understood that someone named John, who seemed to still be inside her house, had assaulted her with a knife. He quickly applied a towel to the numerous wounds on her abdomen and urgently summoned an ambulance and the police. Arriving patrol officers traced the blood from the neighbor's yard back to the Hahn residence. Encircling the house, they commanded the individual inside to exit with hands raised. Moments later, a disheveled bald man emerged on the porch. The officers noted he bore wrist injuries and a stab wound in his abdomen. Due to his injuries, this unidentified man was transported to the hospital in an ambulance, escorted by a police officer. En route to the hospital, the wounded man grew distressed and tearful, expressing regret that this hadn't occurred sooner, and repeatedly murmuring a desire to die. Following his medical treatment, the police endeavored to ascertain his identity, reasons for being in the Hahn residence, and circumstances leading to this tragic event. They soon discovered he was 31-year-old Jonathan Wayne Brill, a close friend of Nation and a guest in their home. Jaime also knew John well. She had employed him as an accountant in her political consulting firm after he relocated to North Carolina. The couple had generously offered him accommodation in their home until he could find his own place. Nation and John hailed from the same hometown and first crossed paths in 2000 during a church trip. Despite a 4-year age gap, they quickly struck up a friendship. As it often happens with childhood friends, they drifted apart when one went off to college, but rekindled their bond post-graduation. They became virtually inseparable. Jonathan even had the honor of being the best man at Nation and Jaime's wedding. In April 2009, the trio was akin to the Three Musketeers, following the ethos of one for all and all for one. They shared vacations, regular Monday dinners, and celebrated holidays together. To some neighbors, Jonathan seemed almost like an extension of the Hahn family, given how much time he spent at their home. This deep, seemingly unbreakable bond makes the violent incident that left all three with stab wounds in their own home all the more perplexing and tragic. Every Monday, Jaime and Nation would host their mutual friend Jonathan for dinner. On that particular day, Jonathan arrived earlier than usual with the intention of discussing recent campaign details with Jaime. The friends were deeply concerned about John's well-being, as he had confided in them about his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, a notably aggressive and often terminal disease. The Hans, in their caring nature, accompanied Jonathan to his medical appointments and were consistently present, offering every possible support in his arduous battle for life. There was an instance when Jaime, overwhelmed with emotion, asked Nation if they should consider having a child soon, so that their future offspring might have the chance to know Jonathan. Such was their affection and regard for their friend. They wished even their yet-to-be-born child could have the opportunity to bond with him. The recent diagnosis of cancer was a harsh blow, but it wasn't the first health challenge Brill had encountered. Over the years, John had experienced multiple hospitalizations. He had once revealed to Nation that he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Consequently, the Hans invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily, offering care and support until his health improved. On that fateful Monday, Jaime and Jonathan were already engaged in work-related discussions in the kitchen when Nation arrived home and headed upstairs to change. Nation was startled by Jaime's screams calling out his and then John's name. Assuming that Brill may have fallen ill given his medical condition, Nation hurried downstairs midway. He was met with Jaime's terror-stricken voice, crying out that someone was trying to stab her. Rushing into the kitchen, Nation was confronted with the horrifying sight of his wife on the floor, bleeding profusely. John stood over her, wielding a large kitchen knife. As Brill started advancing towards Nation, knife raised threateningly, Nation froze in disbelief. How could such a nightmare unfold in mere minutes? In a desperate act of self-defense, Nation grabbed the knife blade with one hand, while striking John in the face with his other hand. Amidst this chaos, he frantically urged Jaime to run for safety, attempting to subdue a man who until moments ago was his closest friend. It seemed almost unreal. Despite her grave injuries, Jaime miraculously managed to rise from the floor and flee through the side door of their home. Once she was out, Nation, overcoming shock and tumult, pushed Jonathan aside and hurried after his wife. Outside, Jaime desperately made her way to the nearest neighbor's house for help. Unfortunately, no one responded to her urgent knocking. Summoning her remaining strength, she attempted to reach the next house, but collapsed unconscious in their yard due to her overwhelming injuries. Alerted by the commotion and drawn by the screams, passers-by quickly came to her assistance, while a neighbor called for an ambulance and the police. Meanwhile, Nation, panicked, searched frantically for Jaime. Following the trail of blood led him to discover her in a neighbor's yard. She was conscious, but in agony, clutching her side. Kneeling beside her, he took her hand and tried comforting her with promises of recovery and future anniversaries and vacations by the sea, though tears streamed down his face. As he spoke, clutching Jaime's hand, Nation was overwhelmed by thoughts of a life without her and unable to fathom how their peaceful life had taken such a sudden turn. As they awaited help, a neighbor swiftly brought a towel to press against Jaime's bleeding abdomen. Unfortunately, the towel was quickly soaked with blood. Another compassionate neighbor elevated Jaime's legs onto a bag of leaves, trying to give some comfort. The ambulance was on its way, but to the onlookers, the wait felt endless. Even though it was only a few minutes, Jaime's breathing grew labored, a clear sign of her critical state. When the paramedics arrived, they promptly administered life-saving measures. Nation, having suffered severe cuts to his hand while wrestling with the knife, also desperately needed medical attention. Both he and Jaime were rushed to the hospital. During transport, Jaime lost consciousness and upon arrival was taken immediately for emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Nation, overwhelmed with worry for his wife and oblivious to his own pain, received stitches. He was in such shock that he repeatedly tried to enter the ICU, desperate for any updates about Jaime, but was denied access. Seated anxiously on a hospital bed, Nation was tormented by thoughts of Jaime's condition. Over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery, and severe liver damage. His only solace during those excruciating moments was hoping and praying for her survival. By some miracle, Jaime did survive the surgery initially. But tragically, this hope was short-lived. She never regained consciousness. 2 days after this harrowing ordeal, Jaime succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy revealed a grim reality. She had sustained 24 stab wounds across various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. However, the most lethal injuries were inflicted on her abdomen and chest, resulting in catastrophic damage to her lungs and liver. Meanwhile, Jonathan Brill had inflicted wounds upon himself and was hospitalized for 8 days to recover from his self-inflicted injuries. On Tuesday, April 30th, 2013, still needing medical attention with bandages on both wrists, Brill was transported on a stretcher to the magistrate's office in Wake County. He was formally charged with first-degree murder in the case of Jaime Hahn and assault with a deadly weapon on Nation Hahn. Due to the severity of the charges, he was held without bail at Central Prison in Raleigh. This facility was specifically chosen because it housed a hospital wing, ensuring that Brill would continue to receive the necessary medical treatment while in custody for his crimes. The tragic and sudden loss of Jaime profoundly impacted many, leaving a lingering question. Why would someone she considered a best friend commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future? In the wake of the tragedy, speculation swirled within the community about a substantial amount of money that had gone missing during the election campaign managed by Jaime's team. Jonathan Brill, who had served as the accountant, officially ceased working for the company at the end of 2012. Despite this, he remained responsible for providing Jaime with financial details and assisting in the preparation of financial reports. It was suspected that Jaime might have discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this discrepancy. This confrontation could have triggered his violent outburst. On April 22, 2013, Jaime had invited Jonathan over for their regular Monday dinner and intended to discuss the company's financial issues. The exact sequence of events during Nation's brief absence remains unclear. However, it is widely believed that Jaime might have challenged Jonathan regarding the missing funds during this time. As time passed, Nation's physical wounds began to heal, but emotional and psychological scars remained deep and unhealing. 6 months following this devastating event, Jaime's family and Nation, her grieving husband, scattered her ashes near Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church. This place was significant because Jaime had dedicated her time and efforts as a volunteer there. In a poignant twist of fate, just a week before the tragedy, the Hahns had requested the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who they believed was battling cancer. Did they know that soon it would be they who needed the prayers of their community in the wake of such an unimaginable loss? Nation had to grapple with the truth that an individual he had known from childhood, whom he saw as his dearest friend, had completely shattered his life, and even more heartbreakingly, claimed the life of the woman he adored more than anything in the world. According to Nation, Jaime was his anchor, his backbone, and his soulmate. He couldn't fathom how the sun could continue to glow without her. The trial of Brill commenced on March 4, 2015. The district attorney informed the jury that Jonathan, serving as Jaime's financial manager, had written 39 checks to himself, misappropriating around $50,000, the identical sum missing from the account. To rationalize his deeds, Brill claimed various health issues, including brain impairment from multiple sclerosis, memory deficits, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. Compassionate Jaime refrained from confronting John about such a sensitive matter during his challenging times. She tactfully sidestepped the issue, hoping Brill would identify and rectify the mistake. All seemed normal until she got a call from a debt collector. Then the district attorney unveiled a startling truth. The preceding year, the defendant's first hospitalization occurred when he was admitted following an episode at the Hahn's residence. Prior to that, Jonathan hadn't sought any medical treatment, as his health records confirmed. All along, he had deceived Jaime and Nation about his health conditions. No gallbladder operation, no multiple sclerosis, and no cancer, but merely a manifest mental disorder and something dreadful. His internet search history revealed that the man had been seeking information on pancreatic cancer and specialists in this particular field, evidently to lend credibility to his falsehoods. He also looked up cruises that could be taken without a passport. John had arranged a one-way journey to Las Vegas for April 23rd, but canceled it on the 22nd, merely 2 hours before assaulting Jaime with a knife. Jonathan admitted to the authorities that he had indeed misappropriated the campaign funds and fabricated all his medical conditions. When the Hans escorted him to medical appointments, waiting in the car as devoted, caring friends, he merely roamed the hospital halls. In recent times, Jonathan grappled with depression and suicidal inclinations. He confessed to being tormented by voices urging him to harm others. He purchased the knife for himself, supposedly planning to use it in Vegas to end his life. Yet, he believed Jaime would confront him about the financial irregularities. When she did, he began to inflict wounds on himself. Jaime attempted to intervene, but at that point, he was so deranged and furious that he started assaulting his friend impulsively. Jonathan recalled attacking Jaime, yet parts of this episode were wiped from his memory. His lawyer and Jonathan himself realized that fully dismissing the charges was unfeasible due to the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Still, they aimed to argue for temporary insanity to lessen the sentence. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Nation Han was allowed to speak. With a voice filled with sorrow, he expressed, "We lock our doors at night to block out the world's evil, but it's chilling to think what occurs when evil holds the key." He addressed these words to his former best friend. On March 19, 2015, the jury announced their decision. They ruled Jonathan Brill guilty of first-degree murder of Jaime Han and the attempted murder of Nation Han. The judge issued a life sentence without parole. Jaime's intentions were utterly pure, and her death was so senseless that even Jonathan later acknowledged in an interview that if he had been honest with the Hans, she would have forgiven him. Suddenly, their closest friend became their worst fear. This story defies any rational explanation. Maureen Erin Fields was born November 6, 1964. She graduated from North Arlington High School in New Jersey in 1983. Her loved ones stated she was very particular about her appearance and had cosmetic nose surgery and liposuction. She also never wore jeans or t-shirts in public and never left the house without makeup on. In 2006, 41-year-old Maureen lived with her husband of 15 years, Paul Fields, in Pahrump, Nevada. She had been employed as a bank teller at the Pahrump Valley branch of the Wells Fargo Bank for 3 months. On Valentine's Day, 2006, she was very tearful at work, but did not go into any details about what was wrong. She did, however, tell her co-workers that something was going to happen. When asked if she was going to have a good Valentine's, she replied, "No." The next morning, when she didn't show up for work, her co-workers called her husband. He said they had an argument and then he thought she left for work around 8 a.m. After getting off the phone with her co-workers, he went directly to the police station. Paul later claimed that he attempted to report Maureen as a missing person when he first went to the police station, but the police wouldn't accept a report because she hadn't been missing for 24 hours. However, the police said that when Paul came to the station, he said nothing about a missing person and only asked if there had been any accidents involving a green Hyundai. On February 16th, Maureen's green 2004 Hyundai was found deserted in the Mojave Desert in California, about 20 miles from her home. It had been stuck in the sand about 125 feet off the road. Her keys were in the ignition, the driver's seat was fully reclined, and her slippers and eyeglasses were under the gas pedal. Some religious pamphlets were fanned out next to her purse, which contained her credit cards and wallet. A knotted pair of pantyhose was also there, as were bottles of prescription painkillers and an empty bottle of Xanax. Strangely, the bottle had been wiped clean of fingerprints. There was also a .22 caliber rifle in the back seat that the couple owned. On the ground nearby was a blanket stained with a small amount of blood and vomit. However, there were no signs of Maureen. Authorities initially believed Maureen wandered off into the desert and committed suicide. An extensive search of the area turned up no signs of her, and no suicide note was recovered. DNA from an unidentified male was subsequently discovered on items at the site of the abandoned car. Investigators stated they believed the scene had been staged by whoever was responsible for Maureen's disappearance. Authorities believe foul play was involved in Maureen's case, and for years they focused on Paul as their prime and only suspect. Maureen's family claims the marriage was very troubled and she wanted a divorce. One of Maureen's friends described Paul as a jealous, domineering husband and stated Maureen was afraid he would kill her. She told many people she was afraid of Paul, but she denied any physical abuse. Paul's alibi was that he spent the evening of the 14th at home with Maureen, but his cell phone records from that night showed him making a call to an acquaintance which pinged off a cell tower. The location of this tower seemed to place Paul on the other side of town when the call was placed. He also claimed Maureen had been draining thousands of dollars from their joint accounts prior to her disappearance, and he believed she had a gambling problem as well as a problem with prescription drugs. She normally handled the couple's finances, but after Paul found out about the missing money, he told her he was going to start checking their bank and credit card statements from then on. Paul said Maureen took two $7,000 cash advances off their credit cards prior to her disappearance and withdrew $2,000 from their joint bank account. He theorized she staged a suicide and ran away rather than face up to what she had done. He also said he had evidence that Maureen had asked a third party to kill him prior to her disappearance, but police do not believe these allegations. Police checked into the couple's finances after Maureen disappeared and said Paul's statements were inaccurate and his wife only took one $4,000 cash advance from a credit card. They were able to track down this money and could show she used the funds to pay off another credit card. Paul allowed the police to search his house and property several times. He initially consented to a polygraph but changed his mind later on the advice of his attorney. He has since stopped cooperating with police in Maureen's disappearance. After waiting the required 90-day period following Maureen's disappearance, he went to court to get her name taken off their jointly owned land, claiming abandonment. In an effort to keep Paul from getting her assets, Maureen's father attempted to become her legal guardian. In response, Paul dropped his claims that Maureen abandoned her property and changed her status to a missing person. While she was legally missing, he could not divorce her. He had her declared legally dead in 2009 and was named executor of her estate. Her family reported that she had once said that if she ever disappeared, that Paul did it. Paul's ex-wife and mother of his two daughters claimed that he once slashed her tires and smashed her car window. Police considered Paul to be the prime suspect, but in 2012, the DNA from the knotted pantyhose was matched to an 81-year-old registered sex offender named Keith Wayne Holmes, who was incarcerated after attempting to lure a 12-year-old girl into his car in Pear Blossom, California. When Holmes was arrested, a newspaper clipping of an anniversary article about Maureen's disappearance was found under a mattress in his 1965 camper. Witnesses placed Holmes in the Pahrump area in 2006 as they remembered him frequenting local campgrounds during that time. When Holmes was questioned by police, he explained the DNA evidence by claiming he and Maureen had consensual sex together before he left her alive in Death Valley, and they went their separate ways. Holmes died in a prison hospice in April 2014. He also stated he knew Paul but didn't provide any further information about Maureen's disappearance. He was questioned repeatedly by the police in his final days, but he had dementia and was often not lucid. Authorities stated finding Holmes didn't mean that Paul was ruled out as a suspect. In spite of the DNA match, police have not eliminated Paul as a suspect and believe the two men were both involved in Maureen's disappearance. As of today, Maureen has never been found and the case remains unsolved. Randy Layton Evers was born December 3, 1988. On February 16, 1992, when he was 3 years old, his father, Mike Evers, and stepmother, Tina Evers, had a party to celebrate his father's birthday. There was a lot of drinking going on at the party and many people were coming and going throughout the night. One report states that around midnight, his father, stepmother, and other friends left to go to Gold Coast Casino, leaving Randy in the care of a man that was passed out on the couch while Randy slept on the floor. Another report states that Tina went with friends while Mike went to bed with his 1-year-old daughter. Either way, Randy was last seen between 11:30 p.m. on February 15th and 12:30 a.m. on February 16th, 1992. He was last seen wrapped in a blanket and asleep on the living room floor at 313 East Rochelle Avenue in Las Vegas, Nevada. At some point, it was discovered that he was missing. Strangely, Randy's father and his stepmother Tina did not participate in the search for him, and both showed very little interest in the case. Mike even had to be dragged out of bed when police told him Randy was missing. Tina's alibi for the night Randy went missing showed multiple inconsistencies. When the group returned from the casino at approximately 3:30 a.m., Randy was missing. An extensive search was done of the surrounding area, but it failed to turn up any clues. They would leave the area for Southern California 4 years after Randy was last seen with their daughter and son, who was born after Randy disappeared. The couple would later divorce in 1997. There have been no reported problems with their other 2 children. While they were not very cooperative in the investigation, they did not try to avoid authorities either. They both initially refused to take a polygraph exam, but later agreed, and both failed the test when asked questions about the boys' whereabouts. There has been much speculation about the actual cause of Randy's disappearance, including theories that he was sold, killed accidentally or intentionally by Tina or Mike after the birthday party broke up, or maybe even abducted by a stranger, a family friend, or his biological mother. However, none of these theories have been substantiated. A Nevada grand jury was given evidence by investigators sometime after Randy disappeared, but indictments were not handed down due to the lack of evidence. Mike and Tina were given the chance to testify, but both refused. In a media interview in the spring of 2015, a detective investigating the case said he had gotten a hit on Randy's DNA in a database, and he believes Randy might be alive and living in the western United States. Alexis Maynard, Randy's biological mother, had legal custody of her son when he disappeared. Police originally thought she might have driven up from Southern California to take her son. However, investigators later determined she was not a suspect. She said more than a week went by before she even knew her son was missing. She says she found out about the disappearance when the FBI knocked on her door in San Diego. Apparently, Mike and Tina did not let her know that Randy was missing. She said the experience of her son disappearing changed her life. She said the process was so traumatic that she couldn't even raise her eldest daughter, so family had to take her in. She would later get her life back together and raise 2 daughters in Texas. It would be 20 years before the police followed up with her about Randy's disappearance. Mike Evers later died in 2014. Sadly, Randy has never been found, and if he is alive, he would be 32 years old. But as of today, this case remains unsolved. Ruby Estelle Dorman was born July 7, 1924. In 2003, Ruby was 78 years old and worked as a buffet hostess at the Flamingo Laughlin in Laughlin, Nevada. On April 20, 2003, she clocked out at 2:26 p.m. and changed out of her uniform and into a black sweater, slacks, and shoes and headed home in her white Honda Accord. Ruby's daughter, 46-year-old Julian White, whose birth name was Juanita White, called her mother's roommate, Jane Rugy, that morning and asked for directions to their mobile home. Jane said that Ruby had already left for work when her daughter arrived, and then Jane fell asleep. It is believed that Ruby arrived home and left with her daughter in her Honda, but her roommate was asleep at the time and was unsure of this. At 4:50 p.m. that day, her daughter, Julianne, returned to Ruby's house alone, driving her mom's car. She dropped it off and drove away in her own Jeep Cherokee and did not come inside to speak to Jane, who had just awakened from her nap, to see her pulling into the driveway in Ruby's car. The car contained Ruby's purse and keys, but no other evidence leading to a crime or her whereabouts, and she has never been seen again. Julianne has a history of mental illness and long-standing animosity towards her mother and had threatened her in the past. Among other things, she believed that her mother ordered Charles Manson and his followers to murder Rosemary LaBianca, Julianne's aunt on her father's side, in 1969. Rosemary and her husband Lino were stabbed to death in August 1969 in their Los Angeles home, and followers of Charles Manson were convicted of the murders. However, there is no evidence that Manson or any of his followers had any connection to Ruby. In a letter to a Los Angeles investigator, Julian wrote that her mother had sent her away to camp that summer so she could plot the LaBianca's murders. Julian also wrote a letter reading, "Rosemary LaBianca let it be known that she wanted to adopt me so as to save me." Ruby Dorman made the decision to get even with Rosemary LaBianca and sent her address to the Manson family. She then wrote that when her mother read about the murders the next day, she let out a phony scream, knew that by tolerating her evil presence, I would eventually get each and every detail about the day my aunt was slain. Julianne was interviewed twice by authorities after her mother's disappearance and reportedly gave inconsistent statements. She denied driving Ruby's car or seeing her at all the day she vanished, although Ruby's roommate witnessed her doing both. Julian moved away a short time after her mother disappeared, and investigators have not been able to locate her for a third interview, and there is insufficient evidence to charge her in her mother's case. Police believe she could provide more information if they could only find her. However, due to a lack of evidence, they have been unable to acquire an arrest warrant. Based upon interviews with people who knew the family and based upon Julianne's statements and writings, she apparently held her mother accountable for everything that went wrong in her life. An 80-year-old Las Vegas woman who asked that her name not be used during an interview in the early 2000s said Julianne was staying with her during the time that Ruby went missing. The woman was like a second mother to Julianne, who lived with the woman part-time when she was between the ages of 18 months and 6 years old. She said she remembers Julianne rambling about the connection to the Manson family during her most recent stay with her, but she tried not to pay attention. Recalling April 20th, 2003, the woman said that she didn't notice Julianne behaving any differently. She stated that Julianne stayed in her bedroom so much that she finally told her she should get herself a job. Before long, she packed her bags and moved out. She later visited the woman to see if she had any mail, and said she had gotten a job at a pickle factory. In 2002, Julianne wrote a book on Jimmy Page of the band Led Zeppelin. Investigators stated that she is divorced and is believed to be moving around the country, living off the profit of the sale of her home. Ruby was described as a very reliable person who had not missed a single day of work in 20 years prior to her disappearance in April 2003. Her credit cards have never been used since she went missing. No one has been charged in connection with her case, and as of today, it remains unsolved. A wealthy businesswoman, tired of solitude and possessing a significant fortune, met a charming anesthesiologist. He dreamed of finding his ideal partner. From their first encounter, there was a storm of passion between them. Not everyone, however, was pleased with the joy the eyes of this enamored pair. Deborah, the protagonist of our story, is a stylish, successful, and quite affluent woman. Her millions weren't luck. They were the result of her dedication and hard work. She spent years climbing in the interior design industry and eventually founded her own design firm, Ambrosia. Over 3 decades, poured herself into this venture with deep passion for her profession. However, her personal life didn't reflect this success. Although she married 4 times, each union ended in divorce. Despite being a devoted mother to her 4 children, her romantic relationships continually fell short. Having secured her financial future, Deborah yearned for something more essential, the simple joy of familial happiness. Her life took a significant turn due to a family tragedy several years ago when Cindy, her older sister, was killed by Billy Vickers in March 1984. During the trial, their mother testified against Cindy and supported Billy. Consequently, Vickers received a very light sentence and spent only a few years in prison for this horrible murder. Billy and Cindy had 2 kids, and this event deeply scarred them. Following this ordeal, Deborah faced extreme anxiety and developed panic attacks, fearing firearms. Living alone for an extended period didn't help. Despite friends urging her to buy a pistol for protection, she couldn't tolerate having a weapon nearby. Deborah always took great care of her appearance and surrounded herself with beautiful things. She invested considerable time and money in skincare, makeup, and hair care at this point in her life. She owned a variety of stylish items, including Chanel jewelry, Cartier watches, denim clothing, and Gucci shoes. The only thing she lacked was a devoted partner. John Mayen, a central character in our narrative, was born on February 3, 1958 in California. He grew up alongside his sisters Karen and Donna. His father, known for his deceitful and fraudulent behavior, imparted these traits to John early in life. John became involved in deceptive schemes and fraudulent activities to make a living. Additionally, he dealt in illegal substances and used them himself, which led to multiple confrontations with law enforcement and his eventual banishment from California in 1988. John completed his undergraduate studies at Arizona State University, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree. Later on, he joined the University of Dayton's law faculty. His friends nicknamed him Dirty John, due to his ability to effortlessly attract women. John was notably handsome, standing around 6 feet 3 inches tall with hazel green eyes and thick dark hair. His engaging smile particularly appealed to women. After completing his academic journey, John met Tanya Sells, a nurse and esthetist by profession. They got married in November 1990 when she was 25, and he was 31. Their relationship was fundamentally based on falsehoods, as John kept Tanya isolated from his family, alleging their malevolence. Tanya supported her husband while attending medical school in Tennessee and helped him obtain his license as an anesthesiologist. The couple had 2 children. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Tanya discovered from John's mother and sisters that he had been deceiving her about his past. She also found his secret stash of pills stolen from patients in need, pills he himself was addicted to, which explained his temper. Tanya promptly reported this to the police. Following an investigation, John admitted to all charges, but chose to flee the state instead of turning himself in to authorities. He took refuge in a Michigan hotel where the police easily located him. John was found unconscious surrounded by empty pill containers, prompting them to summon an ambulance. While en route to the hospital, he regained consciousness, seized a medication vial, and leapt from the ambulance but was apprehended soon after. Subsequently, he received a 6-year prison sentence in Michigan for resisting arrest and illegal drug possession. However, remarkably, John served only 7 to 17 months behind bars. He somehow managed to have his sentence reduced and was freed in 2004. During this period of his life, he met Deborah. She was 55 and he was 59. They both decided to try online dating, which is how they eventually crossed paths. Deborah was impressed by John's online profile. He described himself as a divorce doctor and a Christian searching for love. After a series of disappointing dates, Deborah was pleasantly surprised when she met John. He showed genuine interest in her life, praised her accomplishments, and seemed different from others. Their first date happened in October 2014 at a restaurant called Houston in Irvine, California. John's aim was to captivate Deborah, and he did so by sharing fabricated tales of his past, like working with Doctors Without Borders in Iraq. He mentioned having 2 children and owning multiple properties. Deborah envisioned him as a selfless doctor devoted to global service. John treated her like royalty, which was exactly what Deborah longed for after seeking companionship for so long. He even expressed eagerness to meet her family. His charming words made Deborah's heart flutter. After leaving the restaurant, they ended up at her penthouse. However, John overstepped boundaries that night. After a few kisses, he tried to escalate things further. Deborah felt uncomfortable with the pressure and asked him to leave. The next morning, John sought to amend his mistake. He called Deborah to apologize, explaining that he had consumed too much alcohol and couldn't contain his emotions. This admission once again raised John's standing in Deborah's eyes, leading them to continue their dates. As their relationship progressed, Deborah and John spent more time together. On their third date, John declared his love and proposed. Deborah was so delighted by their companionship that she overlooked several peculiarities about him. For instance, John consistently wore well-worn medical scrubs, even at stylish events organized by Deborah, and claimed he had no time to change into more appropriate attire. Deborah was unfazed and proudly introduced him as her doctor to friends, posing with him for photos. Their bond deepened, and soon they decided to move in together. Deborah's daughter Jason, who lived with her in the penthouse, was forthright and critical of her mother's partners. She disapproved of John's unkempt appearance, finding it strange that her mother, usually dressed in Gucci, was involved with someone in dirty robes. Jacqueline also noticed John's peculiar interest in the penthouse's art, statues, and paintings, as if he were evaluating their worth. After just 5 weeks of knowing each other, John convinced Deborah they should live separately. They rented a house for $6,500 a month on Balboa Island's waterfront in Newport. Deborah paid $80,000 upfront for several months' rent, while John avoided putting his name on the lease due to tax complications. Deborah was so enamored with John that she covered all expenses herself without informing her children. She couldn't understand why they disapproved of him, as he pampered her like royalty, preparing morning coffee, doing grocery shopping, and striving to simplify her life. Deborah felt she had found her perfect match in John, and hoped that over time her children would warm up to him. Envisioning a harmonious family future, Deborah arranged for John to meet her younger daughter Tara, who was known for having a softer disposition compared to Jacqueline. Tara resided in Las Vegas with her boyfriend, and upon hearing about John over the phone, decided to meet him in person. Tara's visit coincided with Deborah and John's move into their new residence. From their first encounter, Tara felt uneasy about John. His lack of cordiality, combined with his silent, solitary efforts in moving belongings, trying to project a tough exterior, didn't sit well with her. Despite reservations, Tara was willing to give John the benefit of the doubt, yet quickly began observing some concerning signs. John didn't own a vehicle, and although he claimed to have properties in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, he never suggested relocating or even invited them to visit. John appeared to spend most of his days at home, often engrossed in video games. Just before Thanksgiving, Tara decided to snoop through her mother's boyfriend's belongings and found a nurse's certificate with his name, realizing he was not a doctor. When John found out about this, he became furious and threw a massive tantrum. He accused Tara of trying to deprive her mother of happiness, shouting that she wouldn't succeed in separating them, while Deborah just stood there listening. Eventually, there was a big argument and Tara left the house. John used the situation to convince Deborah that her children were only after her wealth. They were waiting for her demise, and thus didn't want to see her happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's mother Arlene, a very religious woman, arrived. John put on an entire religious act in front of her, but received another scandal instead of approval. The holiday ended in another fiasco. Subsequently, Deborah opted to seek guidance from a psychotherapist who recommended establishing limits with her offspring and pursuing a tranquil existence, a suggestion she embraced. She and John made Balboa Island their home, indulging in local eateries, strolling about, and relishing the picturesque views. At times, John exhibited youthful exuberance, capturing bare-chested selfies and sharing them with her, engaging in playful activities which rejuvenated her spirit. Deborah was immensely joyful, yet remained apprehensive about John's attire. His wardrobe was limited to aged medical scrubs, loose frayed trousers, and worn-out shirts, whereas Deborah desired her partner to be fashionably attired and complement her way of life. John claimed his finer garments were pilfered during a stint in Iraq. Hence, Deborah escorted him on a shopping spree, acquiring a complete set of high-end designer outfits for him. In early December, John accompanied Deborah on a work-related trip to Las Vegas. By this time, their acquaintance was just under 2 months old, yet they chose to marry. Deborah concealed this development from her children. On one occasion, an unknown woman managed to enter John and Deborah's residence. John seized this incident to persuade Deborah of the need for enhanced security measures. Subsequently, he set up multiple surveillance cameras within their home, which he operated via his smartphone. He extended this surveillance to his wife's office, aiming to monitor her activities. John's objective was to exert total control over their environment. Gradually, Deborah began to inquire about his family background and previous life. For each query, John had an immediate justification or excuse. Despite noticeable inconsistencies, Deborah chose to ignore them, convinced she had met her ideal partner. However, her children remained skeptical. Jacqueline took the initiative to investigate John's activities. Since he didn't own a vehicle, he utilized Deborah's Tesla. Jacqueline installed tracking devices on the car to monitor his whereabouts, but this surveillance didn't reveal anything significant. Then she and Tara engaged a private investigator. The detective soon returned with findings. They uncovered that John had declared bankruptcy, possessed a nursing license, but not one for practicing medicine, and had resided in Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. One address associated with John was the Orange County Jail. When the daughters shared these discoveries with their mother, Deborah asserted that even if these facts were accurate, her affection for him would remain unchanged. In late March, a letter intended for John was received by Deborah. The sender was a former prison inmate, but she couldn't read it, as John quickly grabbed the letter from her. Initially, he accused her of mistrust with a burst of anger, then claimed it was from a pen pal whom he was supporting emotionally. Deborah felt uneasy about this explanation. The following day, with her husband away on work, she decided to sift through his belongings. This search unveiled startling truths about the man she had wed. She discovered that John was an ex-nurse anesthetist who had succumbed to an addiction to pain medication, leading to his arrest and the collapse of his professional life. Additionally, Deborah uncovered evidence of his history as a swindler. Court records revealed that John had previously cheated and stolen from numerous women. He stumbled upon some court files online. They included a search warrant for his storage unit. Inside the unit, authorities found a .38 caliber handgun, bullets, a GPS tracker, syringes, and other suspicious items. That was the moment Deborah realized John's true identity. He was a dangerous individual and an armed felon. He had several restraining orders against him from different women. Most alarmingly, she discovered he had been released from prison on October 8th and met her just days later. Feeling overwhelmed by these revelations, Deborah examined the documents meticulously. She felt both shocked and scared. She realized the potential danger John posed to her and her children. Choosing to act normal temporarily, Deborah waited for the right moment. When John left for the hospital due to back issues, she seized the opportunity. With her family's help, she moved out during his absence. During the packing process, they found more documents belonging to John. These were prints of online comments from other women warning about him. They described John as persuasive and adept at deception. They cautioned others not to be swayed by his attractiveness and charm. Convinced of his instability, Deborah decided to end their relationship and leave. Despite her decision, John kept messaging her, pleading for her to visit him in the hospital. Overcome with guilt, Deborah relented. By June 2015, John had successfully persuaded Deborah to reconcile with him. He offered many justifications for the oddities found among his possessions. He admitted he had hidden his past because he believed a woman like her wouldn't have noticed him otherwise. For this reason, he pretended to be a doctor to impress her, and now implored her help in rehabilitating and salvaging his life. Still enamored with him, Deborah granted him another chance. They relocated together to a new apartment in Irvine. However, this decision deeply troubled her children, leading the couple to maintain some distance from them temporarily. By March 2016, the couple had been married for a year already. For 3 months, Deborah helped John recover from his addiction. However, she was deeply distressed because her entire family disliked him, especially Jason. This animosity was mutual. Matters escalated to the point where her husband forbade Deborah from seeing her daughter. When John discovered that Deborah was paying for Jacqueline's real estate lessons, he reacted spitefully. He called the school to slander Jacqueline in front of her teachers and wrote her threatening and indecent messages, insisting that her mother no longer wanted anything to do with her. He even threatened that one day he would come and harm Jacqueline. It became evident that while John appeared to be recovering, his malevolence and cruelty were intensifying. By April 2016, Deborah's patience had reached its limit, prompting her to file for divorce. She sought a peaceful dissolution of the relationship and began gradually withdrawing money from her bank account for safekeeping. Unfortunately, she kept $30,000 in a hiding place in one of the lower drawers at home. When John discovered this money, he asserted that it belonged to him as well. Realizing that divorce proceedings were imminent, John started showing more aggression. Sensing the danger, Deborah knew it was time to flee. She took some cosmetics and work items and moved to Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine. a location she felt safe due to numerous surveillance cameras around the complex. Deborah attempted to obtain a restraining order. However, the Orange County judge denied her request since there was no immediate threat. John lived in another state and hadn't made any direct recent moves against her. With little recourse, she focused on breaking off the relationship and moving on. After the separation, John relocated to one of Deborah's properties in Nevada. He repeatedly tried contacting her, but she consistently ignored his calls. Then things took a drastic turn on June 11, 2016. That day, as Deborah drove her Jaguar to work, an alarming incident occurred. Her car was stolen from the parking lot while she was at the office. The vehicle was soon found only about a block and a half away, drenched in gasoline, but not set on fire, resulting in only minor damage. Security footage from the area clearly identified John Mayen as responsible for the theft attempt, a stark reminder of his continued threat and volatility despite living in another state. On the evening of August 20, 2016, Tara came home from work and parked in the lot. As she got out of her car, John suddenly appeared. He attacked her with a knife, trying to drag her back into the vehicle. Screamed for help during the struggle. When John covered her mouth, she bit him hard. A fierce struggle erupted right there in the parking lot. Tara, wearing heavy boots, managed to kick her assailant and knock the knife from his grasp. Seeing a chance, she grabbed the knife and repeatedly stabbed John. She delivered 13 wounds, with the last stab piercing his eye. Trembling with shock, Tara was fortunate that a neighbor saw her and came to help with a towel for her injuries. The neighbor also called the police. John was still alive when paramedics arrived. They found he had a pulse. In John's car, authorities discovered duct tape, cable ties, kitchen knives, and a passport. This indicated he might have planned to abduct Tara and leave the city with her as a hostage. John Mayen was taken to the hospital but died 4 days later at age 57. His remains were cremated and no memorial service was held, as he was universally disliked by those who knew him. Deborah and her children were deeply traumatized by the entire incident. It took some time for Deborah to return to normal life, but she still struggles with guilt for bringing a criminal into their family. Now, Deborah has become very cautious. She carries a stun gun and pepper spray at all times for protection. She has stated that she would never meet someone online again based on this experience. Tara Lee Calico was born February 28, 1969. She graduated from Belen High School in Belen, New Mexico. She then enrolled at the University of New Mexico, where she excelled in her studies and planned to become a psychiatrist or a psychologist. While in college, she worked at a local bank and lived at home with her family. She often enjoyed running and going on frequent bike rides along New Mexico State Road 47. She rode that route nearly every morning and was sometimes accompanied by her mother, Patty Dole. On September 20, 1988, at the age of 19, she left her house on Brugg Street in Bell in New Mexico by herself to go on her usual bike ride at 9:30 a.m. Her bike had a flat tire, so she borrowed her mother's bike to go on her routine 36-mile ride. She had a busy day planned as usual and told her mother that if she wasn't back home by noon to come and get her. Witnesses saw a dirty white or light gray colored 1953 Ford pickup truck with a white handmade camper shell following Tara during her ride. However, she was apparently unaware of the truck's presence due to the headphones she was wearing. At some point on her bike ride, she would go missing and would never be seen again. Police gathered 7 witnesses who saw her on the bicycle that day, 5 of whom also saw the suspicious pickup. The bicycle she was riding that day has also never been found. Tara had plans to play tennis with her boyfriend at 12:30 p.m. and a class at 4 p.m. that day. When Tara didn't arrive home at noon, her mother, Patty Dole, went to look for her at 12:05 p.m. When she couldn't find her along her usual bike route, she contacted the police. The next day, a Boston cassette tape and the front plastic window of a Walkman belonging to Tara was found on the side of the road 3 miles from her home. Near the cassette tape were some bike tracks and marks resembling a scuffle or skids. Later, the rest of Tara's Sony Walkman was recovered 19 miles east of Highway 47, near the remote JFK campground. Rumors have persisted for years that Tara was the unidentified female in a Polaroid photo discovered in a convenience store parking lot in Port St. Joe on June 15, 1989, 9 months after she disappeared. A white, windowless cargo van had been parked in the spot prior to the discovery of the picture. A witness said that the van was being driven by a man with a mustache who appeared to be in his 30s. Police set up roadblocks to intercept the vehicle, but the man was never caught or identified. Officials from Polaroid say the picture was most likely taken after May 1989 because that type of film was not available until then. A copy of the V.C. Andrews novel My Sweet Audrina, a plastic cup, and a squirt gun was also visible in the photo. V.C. Andrews also happened to be Tara's favorite author. There appeared to be a phone number written on the spine of the book, but some of the digits are unreadable. At the time, it was believed that the boy in the picture was Michael Henley, a 9-year-old boy who vanished in April 1988 from New Mexico. Michael's mother said that she was almost certain it was Michael in the Polaroid. The identification of the boy in the photograph as Michael is considered highly unlikely because his remains were discovered in June 1990 in the Zuni Mountains, about 7 miles from his family's campsite from which he had disappeared and 75 miles from where Tara disappeared. Police believe that Michael had gotten lost from the family's campsite and died of exposure. When the picture was televised to the public after it was found, a friend of Tara's parents contacted them and said that the woman resembled Tara. Patty then met with investigators in Florida and examined the Polaroid. She was adamant that the girl in the picture was her daughter. Scotland Yard analyzed the photo and concluded that the woman was Tara, but a second analysis by the Los Alamos National Laboratory disagreed. An FBI analysis of the photo was inconclusive. The FBI examined the photo and cannot determine whether the girl is Tara or if the boy was Michael. It is not known whether the photo was staged or whether the boy and girl were being held against their will. 20 years after her disappearance, Rene Rivera, the sheriff of Valencia County, claimed that he knew what had happened to Tara. According to Rivera, teenage boys who knew her drove up behind her and they accidentally hit her with their truck while they were following and harassing her. Tara later died and the boys had helped burying the body in Valencia County. Rivera stated that he knew the names of those involved and one has since passed away, but without a body, he could not make a case. He also has not released the evidence that led him to this conclusion. Tara's stepfather, John Dole, disputed these claims, saying that the sheriff should not have made these comments if he was not willing to arrest anyone, and that strong circumstantial evidence should be enough for a conviction. Another twist in the story is when Henry Brown made a confession on his deathbed, saying he knew what happened to Tara. He said in 1988, he lived in a trailer next to Lawrence Romero Jr., who was the son of the local sheriff at the time, and they often partied together. Henry said while he was in the basement one night, he saw a grave covered in a tarp. He said that Lawrence told him that he and a friend knew Tara and were very familiar with the route she took on her bike rides. He said that they kidnapped her and took her to a nearby gravel pit and sexually assaulted her. He said when she threatened to go to the police, they stabbed her. Lawrence allegedly bragged that he could get away with crimes because his father was the sheriff. He also claimed they placed her bicycle in a junkyard. Both Henry and Lawrence have since passed away, and it is unknown if the story is true or not. As for the Polaroid picture, it is unknown who the boy and girl actually are. However, some believe it could be Tara. Sadly, Tara's mother, Patty, died in 2006 and her biological father died in 2002. As of today, no arrests have been made and the case remains open and unsolved. Azil Ernesto Rico was born October 4, 2016 to Jorge Rico Rivera and Isela Mauricio Sanchez. 27-year-old Isela was found deceased by her relatives on January 7, 2020. She had allegedly been strangled by her boyfriend Jorge at her home on 602 East Forest Street in Roswell, New Mexico. 3-year-old Ogiel was nowhere to be found and is presumed to have been abducted by Jorge, his non-custodial father, after he killed Isela. There was a history of domestic violence in their relationship and Jorge was previously charged with aggravated battery in October 2019 after he allegedly choked Isela while she was in the bed with their son. Jorge's date of birth is November 17, 1987, making him 32 years old at the time of Azil's abduction. He has outstanding warrants out of New Mexico for first-degree murder, second-degree retaliation against a witness, third-degree abandonment or abuse of a child, an aggravated battery, and a federal warrant was issued for him for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution on January 10th. ICE reports that Jorge was admitted into the U.S. as a non-immigrant on October 6, 2008 by U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers in Houston. The spokesperson did not indicate what, if any, visa program Jorge was on when he entered the U.S., but he violated the terms of his admission when he failed to depart the U.S. by July 10, 2009. Following his arrest on state charges in October 2019, ICE's enforcement and removal operations discovered Jorge was being held at the Chavez County Detention Center. ICE officers then lodged an immigration detainer with the detention center to hold him until they could take him into custody. Jorge was transferred into ICE's custody the same day and served with a notice to appear in court. He was later released from ICE's custody on an order of reconnaissance based on humanitarian grounds. Therefore, at the time of the murder of Azil and the disappearance of Azil, Jorge was in the U.S. illegally. It is believed that Jorge fled to Mexico with Azil. Jorge was born in Mexico and has family members in the states of Zacatecas and Jalisco. He may be traveling in a maroon 2003 GMC Yukon SUV with a turquoise New Mexico license plate reading MNF 231. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $10,000 for information leading to the apprehension, arrest, and/or extradition of Jorge Ernesto Rico Rivera. There continues to be an active Amber Alert for Azil, and as of today, he remains missing. Jean Johnson was born January 14, 1949. On May 27, 2019, she had been watching a friend's dog at her home on Tauhee Road in Capitan, New Mexico, while her friend was away on a trip. Jean's daughter, Heidi, would receive a photo from her mother of her and the dog. Sadly, this would be the last photo of Jean that Heidi would ever receive. Heidi did not hear from her mother the following day, and she never dropped the dog off at her friend's home like she was supposed to. The next day, when her friend called Heidi and told her that Jean did not drop the dog off the day before, she became very concerned and went to her mother's home to check on her. When she arrived, she found the gate to the driveway locked. Jean's car was parked in the driveway with her purse and cell phone inside. The front door to the residence was found slightly opened, but everything inside appeared to be as normal. However, there was no sign of Jean, but her friend's dog was there and had had several accidents inside the house. The police immediately searched the area near Jean's home with helicopters and drones, as well as on foot. Also organized searches for her mother on foot, ATV, and on horseback throughout the Capitan area. The only thing that appeared to be missing was a .357 pistol, which Jean kept in her home and only brought out if she got scared. She used it for protection from both potential intruders and from wild animals such as mountain lions in the remote area where she lived on 10 acres. A silver alert was issued due to her age, and her son stated that she had recently gotten lost but found her way back home within a couple hours. The missing gun led authorities to suspect suicide in her disappearance, but they discounted this theory when someone turned the gun into police 2 months later. It is not publicly known where the gun was found or who turned it in. However, other reports state that the gun was initially located in a pouch on top of laundry that she was planning on taking to her daughter's home. It is unclear why there are conflicting reports about the gun. An extensive search of her property turned up no indication of her. According to her daughter, although she was occasionally forgetful, she had no history of wandering away. She enjoyed a quiet, simple life, gardening and spending time with her children and grandchildren. She lived alone, had only a few friends, and had not dated anyone since her husband passed away 7 years earlier. She still wore her wedding band and kept her husband's ashes in a pendant around her neck. After months without answers, Heidi turned to psychics. Several psychics told her that her mother was buried a bit off the road, but one psychic specifically told her that Jean is buried on private property in Alamo Grotto beneath an Afghan pine tree, and the property owner is unaware of the body being buried there. It is unclear if this property was ever searched. It is also unclear if Jean met with foul play, got lost, or was harmed by a mountain lion. As of today, Jean remains missing and this case remains unsolved. Max received an urgent call from his close friend, Jonathan Hoffman, on May 18, 2012 at 5 p.m. Both were seniors at Farmington Central High School in the affluent West Bloomfield area near Detroit, Michigan. Their friendship began in 9th grade during an English class and was sparked by a mutual appreciation for Tupac, one of the most influential figures in American hip-hop. Jonathan confided in Max that he had recently failed court-mandated drug screening. He had been on probation since authorities found a prohibited synthetic substance in his vehicle 2 months earlier. Jonathan expressed concern over his grandmother Sandra's intense anger towards him. At 17 years old, Jonathan had been living in his grandparents' apartment for 9 months following his parents' divorce and their relocation to Arizona. Initially, Jonathan went with his parents to Arizona. However, shortly after their arrival, the family was dealt a severe blow when his younger sister Jessica was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor. This necessitated multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Adapting to a new school while coping with his sister's health issues left Jonathan feeling unhappy and despondent. Jonathan was overjoyed when his grandmother Sandra suggested he return to West Bloomfield and stay with her until he completed high school. The prospect of reuniting with friends and familiar surroundings excited him. Nevertheless, not everyone approved of the arrangement between Jonathan and his grandmother. Jonathan's father, Michael, a prominent attorney for many years, had observed some disconcerting traits in Sandra's personality. 74-year-old Sandra Lane, a retired educator and mother of 5, could be exacting and stern. While she cherished her grandson deeply along with her 85-year-old husband Fred, the situation presented its challenges given the teenager's yearning to reconnect with friends during what should have been a stable final year at Farmington Central High School. Jonathan's father eventually conceded, allowing him to thrive once again at Farmington High School. There, he was recognized as the class clown, an exceptionally intelligent student and a tech whiz. He had secured a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. His peers saw him as a spirited, cheerful, and optimistic individual. That's why Jonathan's call to Max caused such alarm. He didn't sound like himself. His voice carried not only concern, but also palpable fear. The friends decided to meet up later that same day, and Jonathan promised he'd text within the next 30 minutes to confirm the time. Max waited for the message, but 40 minutes passed with no word from his friend. Growing impatient, Max decided to call Jonathan directly. The phone rang and rang without any response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Jonathan would never be able to reply again. Just before this incident, around 5:20 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police Department received an emergency call from Sandra Lane's residence, Jonathan's grandmother's home. The young caller informed the dispatcher he had been shot and struggled for breath over those 3 minutes. He begged for help, stating that he was on the brink of death. The assailant had already fled the scene without seeking aid. The subsequent events were even more horrific. The emergency dispatcher listened as Jonathan frantically called out for help before several gunshots rang out again. His screams of pain were followed by faint words that he was dying. Then came a short silence before a woman's scream echoed through the line, leading to an eerie quietude. By about 5:30 p.m., West Bloomfield police arrived at Sandra Lane's condo in the serene Maple Point gated community, a neighborhood known for its low crime rate and predominantly inhabited by retirees. A resident had reported hearing gunshots in this typically peaceful area. As officers disembarked from their vehicle onto the neatly kept lawn, they headed into what would become one of their most chilling calls yet. Another gunshot reverberated from within the residence. Before the officers could make their way inside, a woman appeared at the front door, the officer's instructions to disarm herself. She was a small, elderly woman with fading red hair, her clothes spattered with blood. With her hands raised in surrender, she informed the officers that she had just taken her grandson's life. This revelation stunned the officers, yet it paled in comparison to what awaited them inside. As they entered the condo, the officers were confronted with a ghastly scene. Blood and smudges were present in nearly every room. Bullet impacts marred both walls and furnishings, and empty shell casings littered the ground. Near the entryway lay a discarded 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic handgun. Subsequent forensic analysis would uncover additional magazines for the firearm hidden within the residence. On the upper floor, police found 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman sprawled face down in a pool of blood. He suffered from multiple gunshot wounds across his chest, arms, back, and stomach, indicating that many shots were fired at close quarters. Emergency medical personnel swiftly transported him to Botsford Hospital, clinging to hope they could save him. Sadly, by 6 p.m., Jonathan succumbed to his injuries. Sandra was taken to the closest medical facility as a precautionary measure. Medical professionals conducted various examinations to confirm her well-being. The next day, Sandra Lane faced charges for her grandson's homicide and was detained without bail while awaiting trial for either first or second-degree murder. Her guilt left to be determined by a jury. Throughout this ordeal, she maintained her innocence. News of this incident plunged Jonathan's family, friends, and neighbors into deep sorrow and shock. They all pondered what could have driven Sandra to turn a firearm on her dearly loved grandson. The news of this tragic event spread rapidly through the tranquil neighborhood, with media outlets speculating on various theories. Whispers suggested that Jonathan had failed a drug screening test. Journalists highlighted a narrative involving two neglectful parents who left their substance-dependent teenage son in the care of elderly grandparents. Based on the grandmother's testimony, it was revealed that at the time Jonathan's passing, he had an illegal synthetic drug in his system which had previously caused him complications. His death shortly after another sensational incident involving hallucinogen consumption. Just 2 weeks prior, another youth under the influence of drugs assaulted his family with a baseball bat, resulting in a fatal event. Takir Cipriana and his accomplice consumed a prohibited substance before attacking their parents. Sandra Lane's attorney argued that she had legitimate concerns for her safety due to managing a young man on probation who was difficult to restrain. It was widely reported that this particular drug could induce aggression in users. If an incident similar to Takir's had occurred at Sandra's residence, could her actions against Jonathan be justified as self-defense? This was the reasoning Sandra provided to both the police and jury. She asserted that since Jonathan's return to West Bloomfield, he had become unruly and exhibited aggressive behavior. Sandra claimed that he rarely left the house and mingled with teenagers addicted to dangerous synthetic drugs. Sandra also stated that Jonathan's parents did not inform her about his addiction before his arrival, and showed little concern for his activities during his stay. Michael, Jonathan's father, was portrayed as having abandoned him. Jonathan frequently had fits of rage, destroying objects and damaging furniture in his room. When upset or during disputes, he would lash out, even breaking his own possessions like his computer monitor and phone. Authorities confirmed that Jonathan had a history with illegal substances. On March 17, 2011, he was apprehended and penalized for possessing hallucinogenic drugs. Subsequently, in court, he received a 93-day deferred sentence, along with a year of probation and the requirement for random drug screenings related to these substances. Jonathan's acquaintances shared with law enforcement their concerns regarding his drug habit and their efforts to redirect him away from it. Sandra exerted considerable effort to assist Jonathan in reforming his ways, focusing on his academic performance and adhering to her guidelines. Nevertheless, he resisted these attempts, displaying defiance, erratic behavior, and occasional aggression. Fred confirmed that from the moment Jonathan arrived, there were continuous and intense disputes between him and Sandra. She even contacted the police multiple times due to Jonathan becoming utterly unmanageable. She sought assistance from the school as well, but all efforts proved futile. Sandra recounted an incident where Jonathan, under the influence of drugs, lost complete control. This situation necessitated hospital staff to restrain him to a gurney. The elderly woman implored his parents for help. However, his father remained indifferent and did not return to Michigan. Gradually, Sandra began fearing for her safety. She confided in her husband about her concerns regarding their grandson and his disreputable associates. In a bid for self-protection and to safeguard her elderly husband, feeling cornered with no other option, Sandra acquired a Glock 17 pistol for defense in case Jonathan or his friends became aggressive. On the critical morning of May 18, 2012, took Jonathan for a drug test that returned positive for illicit substances. Jonathan was instructed to undergo another test later that day. Upon receiving another positive result, he became furious while in his grandmother's vehicle. He resorted to swearing violently, kicking the dashboard and at one point seizing the steering wheel, compelling Sandra to halt the car multiple times. Jonathan even attempted to snatch the car keys at one juncture. Upon their return home, confrontation intensified. Apprehensive that he might be incarcerated, Jonathan decided to flee immediately to Arizona. He demanded $2,000 and the car keys from his grandmother. She complied with neither request. When Grandpa Fred took the dog for a walk, Sandra felt overwhelmingly frightened and attempted to pacify the teenager, to no avail. She retreated to her bedroom and retrieved the loaded pistol, hoping it would compel her grandson to heed her words, or at least acknowledge her presence. Upon returning upstairs to Jonathan's bedroom and finding him in the bathroom, instead of heeding her, the boy hurled insults, kicked her in the abdomen, and struck her on the head. A struggle ensued during which Sandra discharged the firearm. She then fled to the basement in a state of panic, seeking refuge. After a while, she ventured upstairs to check on him, only for her grandson to assault her once more, attempting to wrest the gun away. In the ensuing she shot again in self-defense. This narrative paints a picture of elderly individuals trapped in a dire predicament that tragically culminated in Sandra shooting her beloved grandson out of genuine fear for her own life. However, questions remain as to whether Lane's account is entirely accurate. As the investigation deepened, a contrasting narrative began to surface, one that was still tragic but considerably more concerning. Initial claims by Sandra regarding Jonathan's alleged violent nature didn't align with the experiences of those who knew him personally. Contrary to portraying him as aggressive, interviews revealed that at school, Jonathan was known as humorous and peace-loving. He was always quick to diffuse conflicts with his humor and intelligence. Friends also testified that they hadn't observed any recent changes in his demeanor. Furthermore, Jonathan was described as having a very lean build, standing at just 1.67 meters tall and weighing merely 50 kilograms, hardly fitting the profile of a physically intimidating person. His stature was notably similar to his grandmother's. It appeared that instances of Jonathan's so-called rage were exclusively reported by Sandra, a claim now met with skepticism. Fred, Sandra's husband, acknowledged witnessing heated arguments between his wife and grandson. Despite being present at home almost all the time, there was never any physical violence. Sandra played a key role in overseeing Jonathan's education, establishing strict expectations, which the teenager had difficulty meeting. Fred even suggested sending Jonathan back to his parents in Arizona. However, Sandra rejected this proposal, contradicting her claim that the boy was unmanageable under her care. Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, told the police that during the 9 months Jonathan stayed with his grandparents, he maintained daily communication with her and visited them monthly. Throughout this period, Sandra never reported any issues between her and Jonathan, nor did she express feeling overwhelmed by his presence. When Jennifer learned about Jonathan's legal troubles involving illicit substances, she discussed possible solutions with her mother. She considered either rehabilitation or sending him back to Arizona. Sandra convinced her that she could handle the situation independently. Reluctantly, Jennifer agreed to leave her son in her parents' Warwick custody, a decision that would later prove tragically significant. Authorities were summoned to the Lane household on 2 occasions. The first call came in March 2012, when Jonathan himself dialed emergency services. He was distressed after consuming magic mushrooms and experiencing severe paranoia, fearing for his life. Upon arrival, police noted that he showed no aggression but was terrified upon seeing them. He eagerly embraced one officer before being secured to a stretcher for his protection and transported to a medical facility. Just 4 days after this incident with magic mushrooms, Sandra Lane reached out to 911 again. She reported that her grandson was enraged and attempting to flee, while Jonathan informed the dispatcher that his grandmother was forcibly trying to confine him in her vehicle. When officers arrived, they encountered Jonathan vocally berating his grandmother. The law enforcement officials then proposed intervening with the irate youth. Sandra opted to handle the matter herself. This episode was recorded in the police files as a routine verbal dispute between a guardian and a child, which was settled amicably. However, for the detectives leading the investigation, this case increasingly seemed less about a rebellious teenager spiraling out of control and more about a woman enforcing her authority over a defiant child. The hearing on April 12th regarding the possession of prohibited substances and subsequent probation had evidently enraged Sandra. She believed she could discipline her grandson effectively. Up until that point, Sandra had been resolute in steering Jonathan onto the correct path. Yet, as graduation neared and her opportunities dwindled, this mission began to look like a failure. In that moment, Sandra faced many choices. She could have contacted her daughter or sent Jonathan for rehabilitation. Instead, she acquired a semi-automatic pistol and took several shooting lessons at a firing range. Determined to prevail in this conflict and assert control over her unruly teenage grandson at any cost, for days after Jonathan was placed on probation, Sandra Lane applied for a license to carry a firearm. On April 18th, she purchased a 9mm Glock, explaining to the store owner that she needed it for home protection. She chose a weapon intended for lethal force, along with ammunition, containing expanding bullets designed to inflict maximum damage. After buying the pistol, Sandra trained at the nearest shooting range until she felt proficient in handling it. She kept her newfound expertise hidden from her husband, who remained unaware of the gun's presence in their home. He was quite taken aback when he discovered how much his wife had managed to achieve covertly. On the fateful day of May 18, 2012, Sandra and Jonathan returned home at around 5 p.m. Sandra then requested her husband, Fred, to take their dog for a walk and insisted that he remain outside until she gave him permission to return. Their outdoor time extended for so long that both homeowner and dog grew weary. They ended up sitting together on the grass watching a basketball game. As Fred Wayne, the grandfather of the deceased high schooler, recounted during an interview when they heard police sirens, he failed to grasp the situation. Why did Sandra want Fred to leave them? It seemed less like the action of a woman fearing for her life, and more like someone with a plan, intent on carrying it out without interference or witnesses. If Jonathan was as agitated as described by his grandmother, it's unlikely Fred would have left them alone. However, more compelling evidence against Sandra was yet to come. At that same time, at 5 p.m., Jonathan was talking with his friend Max about their evening plans. Max informed the police that Jonathan's tone wasn't angry or excited. Instead, he sounded frightened. He was worried about failing a drug test and anxious about his grandmother's reaction. Jonathan mentioned that Sandra was so furious she threatened to send him back to Arizona. Sandra claimed her grandson violently assaulted her, striking her in the head and abdomen before she discharged the firearm. Medical personnel from the nearest hospital examined her immediately after the incident, but found no injuries or bruises. Ballistic evidence revealed Sandra fired the weapon more than 10 times throughout various locations in the house. 6 bullets struck Jonathan. 2 shots were aimed at his back, indicating he attempted to flee from Sandra. Another shot struck him in the abdomen while he was wounded and conversing with a 911 dispatcher. The police were convinced it was Sandra chasing Jonathan, not the other way around. The grandmother sought to punish her grandson for his perceived wrongdoing while he sought refuge. At some point, she descended to the basement to reload her pistol, likely when Jonathan ascended to his bedroom to call 911, and subsequently returned, shooting him at close range while he lay on the floor bleeding. The final conclusive blow against Sandra's claims of self-defense came from the toxicology report. According to the report, at the time of the shooting, Jonathan's bloodstream didn't contain any prohibited substances. Only a metabolite of a harmful drug was identified in his urine. The forensic examiner clarified that the residual traces discovered in the urine indicated that all substances had left his body and had no impact on Hoffman's behavior. In other words, Jonathan was entirely lucid when Sandra opened fire on him. Consequently, the jury dismissed the defendant's self-defense claim. On March 19, 2013, Sandra Lane was convicted of a serious crime against her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Prior to sentencing, the elderly woman expressed regret for her actions, pleading for understanding. She claimed that her intention had not been to take the teenager's life, but rather to help him resolve his issues together. Meanwhile, her daughter Jennifer urged for the harshest punishment for her mother. She asserted that Sandra Lane was utterly malevolent and would undoubtedly repeat her actions if given the opportunity. Jennifer depicted her mother as a monstrous and obsessed individual fixated on academic achievement. She firmly believed that everything Lane had stated in her statement was falsehoods. She concluded by stating that her son now resided in heaven, a place where Sandra would never have access. Lane received a minimum sentence of 20 years in addition to a mandatory 2-year term for utilizing a weapon in the commission of manslaughter. Her lawyer had pleaded on her behalf, citing concerns about her potential survival during an extended prison confinement. Jonathan's funeral occurred on May 22, 2012, with approximately 700 people who had known and cherished the young man in attendance. They fondly recalled moments spent with him and cherished him as a cheerful individual who never failed to bring laughter to those around him. As a grandson, Jonathan fell short of his grandmother's expectations, ultimately leading her to conclude that he did not belong in this world. Vincent Palmieri, who lived in Staten Island, New York, was a 35-year-old man that vanished around May 1, 1972. He married his childhood sweetheart and the couple had 9 children together. His wife, Annette, filed a missing persons report on May 5, 1972. During the search for him, they would find his abandoned car at the JFK Airport in Queens, New York. About a month later, the body of a partially dressed man with distinctive tattoos was discovered by a sewage repair worker. The body was found about 350 miles from Staten Island in the Passumpsic River in Vermont and had been shot multiple times. The man had a gold pinky ring on and the name Annette tattooed on his upper right forearm, and surrounding a heart on his lower arm was then Love A.U., a tribute to his wife's maiden name, Annette Uricola. It turned out to be Vincent Palmieri, but it would take 35 years to identify him and another 10 years before his family was connected to him. During those 45 years, his wife and their 9 children never knew his body had washed ashore 1 month after his disappearance. In 1972, there was no internet, no national fingerprint database, and no DNA technology available. Therefore, the case would go cold and police would label him as the Passumpsic River floater. During those 45 years, his remains lay in a grave with an anonymous marker in Lakeview Cemetery in Burlington, Vermont, until the Vermont State Police located and contacted his children in 2017. They brought their father's remains home to be buried on Staten Island next to their mother, who passed away in 2015 of natural causes. In 2020, his family filed an $800,000 lawsuit against the state of Vermont and the Vermont State Police. The lawsuit alleges shoddy investigative work by Vermont police detectives and a lack of effort to identify the body when he was first found in 2006. The gun that killed Vincent, a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver, was linked to 2 other slayings in Greater Springfield, Vermont, within weeks of his death. The bodies of organized crime figure Victor DeCara and a low-level criminal Gary Dubé also turned up in watery graves riddled with bullets. Only Gary's murder was solved. Francis Soffin, a notorious outlaw and bank robber who died in prison in 2015, pleaded guilty in 1973 to killing Gary and another man, Stephen Perot. Available police and court records offer little evidence of any meaningful investigation into Victor's killing, other than a short missing person report filed with Agawam Police Department. The Hamden District Attorney's Office does not appear to have a single investigated file linked to his death. At the time, the agency was led by the late Matthew Ryan, who reportedly had an association with gangsters and was known to shut down certain investigations. Victor's unsolved murder is not even listed in the cold case database on the Hampton County District Attorney's website, which features cases dating back to the late 1950s. For years, the critical link among the 3 deaths was neither publicized nor probed by law enforcement until the Palmieri family began its own investigation. They asked why their father met the same end with the same gun as Gary Dubé, a witness against Francis Soffin and Victor DeCara, who allegedly took an interest in the wrong gangster's wife and disappeared from the parking lot of his restaurant near the Agawam Rotary. Soffin was a well-known hitman during his criminal heyday in the 1960s and 70s, leading a group of outlaws known as the Soffin Gang. But Vincent's family says to their knowledge he had no connection with Soffin and no ties to the greater Springfield area or anyone in New England. While the bodies of all three men were dumped in waterways between Connecticut and Vermont, Vincent's was the farthest from home, suggesting his killer or killers wanted him to stay gone. Vincent was identified by Vermont State Police in 2006 using the National FBI Fingerprint Database. Now retired, Captain J.P. Sinclair, who headed the state's cold case unit, helped the Palmieri children bring their father's remains home a decade later. Sinclair said they were unable to find the next of kin until a young researcher decided to try Ancestry.com and got a hit. Sinclair said their bodies were never publicly linked through a ballistics report, which is a curious thing since it did exist. The ballistics report by the Connecticut State Police Lab in the state where Victor's body was found sat dormant, and the reason remains unclear. In 1972, the lab identified a common .38 caliber pistol to link the killings. Soffin pleaded guilty to Gary's murder in 1973, plus the murder of Stephen with a different weapon. Sinclair said during initial interrogation after Soffin's arrest, he made a vague reference about the man found in the river in Vermont being a nobody from Springfield, but there was never any apparent follow-up. Had no criminal record and only a single arrest in his youth, and Vermont police could never track down the arrest report. The Palmieri family cannot even locate the missing person report their mother filed with New York City police. Vincent Jr. stated in an interview, if this was a mob hit, they would have whacked him in the middle of the street and left him there as a message. That's how the mob does that. This wasn't that. In 2019, a 48-year-old woman from New Jersey approached the Palmieris to inform them they shared the same father. She said she made the discovery through a DNA test ordered on the internet. According to the Palmieris, the woman's mother initially denied any connection to the late Vincent Palmieri Sr. in interviews with police. But Vincent Jr. said she later admitted to her daughter that she knew his father. The woman's mother had been married to a man with a long criminal history who raised Palmer's child as his own. However, the woman's mother and stepfather has since passed away. Vincent's family has been told that the records repository where any documentation may have been held was washed away by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. Nobody has ever been arrested for Vincent's death, and the case remains unsolved. Lynn Catherine Scholes was born February 9, 1953, and grew up in Connecticut. After graduating high school, Lynn went on to enroll at Middlebury College. On December 10, 1971, the 18-year-old freshman had an end-of-the-semester exam in her English drama class that she had been studying hard for. Around noon, she was seen at a local food store called All Good Things on Court Street in Middlebury buying dried prunes. Soon after, she was seen standing outside of the store eating the prunes near the bus stop. Strangely, she told a fellow student at the bus stop that she was going to take a bus to New York, although the bus had already left. The next time she was seen was 12:45 p.m. in her dorm room by a fellow student that was also scheduled to take the exam. She left her room at 12:55 p.m. When she was on her way with her friends to take the final exam, she said she had forgotten her favorite pen and was going to go back to get it. The exam was scheduled for 1 p.m., but Lynn never showed up. At 2:15, Lynn was seen by a fellow student standing on Court Street, across the street from the All Good Things store, and back at the bus stop where she'd been earlier. This would be the last time anyone saw or heard from her. She left her identification, checkbook, and all her personal belongings behind in her dorm room when she vanished. Campus security was notified of her disappearance 2 days after she was last seen, but her parents were not notified for a week. Lynn had mentioned the idea of faking her own death and starting a new life prior to her disappearance, but her friends did not take her seriously. In the letter she wrote frequently to family and friends back home, she admitted she felt homesick and had considered withdrawing from school. However, she never indicated she was planning on dropping out of sight leaving college before the autumn term was over. She had also already registered for her spring semester classes. Her relatives don't believe she was unusually distressed. She took her English drama class seriously, had perfect attendance, and studied hard for her final exam, which she never made it to. Although her academic performance at Middlebury wasn't as good as it had been in high school, she wasn't failing any classes either. There were several possible sightings of Lynn after her disappearance, but none of them were confirmed. The store she was last seen at, All Good Things, was owned by none other than Robert Durst. If you are unfamiliar with Robert Durst, he lived in the Mandalbury area for about 2 years and was the heir and son to a wealthy New York City tycoon. Before I continue with Robert Durst, if you don't want me to spoil his story, go watch The Jinx on HBO. I highly recommend it. Robert Durst had a long history of death surrounding him. His first wife, Kathy Durst, would go missing in 1982. His neighbor in Texas was found dismembered, and Durst was later charged with the crime but acquitted, and his best friend, Susan Berman, was found shot to death in her California home, and in 2015, he was arrested and charged in her death. He was also the suspect in the disappearance of Karen Mitchell from Eureka, California in 1997. In July 2012, police received a tip that Durst had owned All Good Things in 1971 where Lynn was last seen. However, they did not reveal this detail publicly until Robert Durst's arrest made headlines a few years later. As of today, Lynn has never been found and this case remains unsolved. Brianna Alexandra Maitland was born October 8, 1986. On her 17th birthday, she decided to move away from her parents' farm to be closer to her friends. She transferred high schools and lived in and out of several of her friends by the end of February 2004. She had dropped out of school and moved in with her childhood friend, Jillian, in Sheldon, Vermont. She then enrolled in a GED program and began working 2 jobs as a waitress and a dishwasher. On March 19, 2004, Brianna passed her GED exam and she and her mother had lunch to celebrate. Brianna was in good spirits and spoke of plans to attend college part-time. After lunch, Brianna and her mother spent the afternoon shopping and running errands. While waiting in the checkout line of a store, her mother said something outside caught Brianna's attention. She told her mother she would return shortly and left the store. When her mother Kelly met her in the parking lot, she noticed that Brianna seemed shaken and agitated. Not wanting to pry, her mother didn't ask what had happened and dropped Brianna off at home between 3:30 and 4 p.m. This was the last time she saw her daughter. At some point before leaving for her work shift, Brianna left a note for her roommate saying she would return after work that evening. The last time she was seen was leaving her dishwashing job at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery, Vermont at 11:20 p.m. Her coworkers asked her to have dinner with them, but she declined because she was tired and had to get up early to go to her second job as a waitress. When she didn't arrive home, her roommate thought she might have moved back in with her parents. As several days passed, her roommate decided to call Brianna's parents, and that is when she was told that Brianna wasn't there and a missing persons report was filed. Brianna's 1985 sedan was found on March 20th, the day after she was last seen, off East Berkshire Road and Route 118, across from Dutchburn Farm Road, back into an abandoned farmhouse. This location is only a mile from the Black Lantern Inn where she was working the night she was last seen. 2 of her uncashed paychecks were on the front seat of the car. Outside of the car was a water bottle, an unsmoked cigarette, jewelry, and some loose change. A woman's fleece jacket was also found in a field near Brianna's car, but it apparently did not belong to her. Her car had minor damage and had apparently backed into the building and punctured a hole in the wall. The trooper assumed the car had been abandoned by a drunk driver, and a towing company took the vehicle to a local garage. Investigators later believed the accident may have been staged. Police did not initially report the abandoned car to Brianna's mother, who is the registered owner. Her mother did not learn about the discovery of the car until 5 days afterward. The abandoned car and Brianna's disappearance were not connected until the missing persons report was filed 3 days later. There has been some speculation that Brianna's disappearance is related to the disappearance of Mara Murray, a nursing student from Massachusetts who vanished February 9, 2004 in Haverhill, New Hampshire after getting into a car accident. The FBI met with local authorities to discuss possible links between the cases. Both Mara and Brianna disappeared after car accidents in which their cars were left behind with personal items inside and more similar in appearances. However, the FBI and local law enforcement concluded that, despite the apparent similarities, Mara and Brianna's cases were probably not connected to each other. However, the theory was not completely ruled out. About 3 weeks before Brianna disappeared, she was allegedly attacked by former female friend Keely in front of several witnesses. The reasons for the assault are unclear, but Brianna's father later stated that he believed it stemmed from jealousy over her interaction with a boy at a party. Although Brianna had extensive training in jiu-jitsu, she did not try to defend herself and instead just sat in the truck of Keely's ex-boyfriends. After the attack, she went to the hospital and received treatment for a broken nose, facial cuts, and a concussion. She then filed a criminal complaint against Keely, and the case was still pending when Brianna disappeared. After she vanished, the district attorney dropped the complaint against the objections of Brianna's parents. Police stated that Keely was cleared of any involvement in her disappearance. After Brianna's disappearance, several people came forward to law enforcement to report sightings of her car at the old Dutchburn house the night she disappeared. A man who drove by the house between 11:30 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. on the night of March 19th said the car's headlights may have been on. This would have been right after she left work that night. He said he did not see anyone in or around the car. A second man who drove by between midnight and 12:30 a.m. on Saturday, March 20th, recalled seeing a turn signal flashing on the car. Around 4 a.m. on Saturday, March 20th, a former boyfriend of Brianna's drove past the scene after a night of partying across the border in Canada. He thought he recognized the vehicle, but he did not see anyone in or around it. The next morning, some passing motorists found the scene odd enough that they stopped and took pictures of it. On March 30th, 2004, after her car had been impounded for several days, it was processed for evidence by the state crime lab. Upon the car's return to her parents, her father noted that her ATM card, glasses, contact lens case, and migraine medication had all been left inside. Her parents publicly speculated that she may have been abducted by multiple people because it would have been difficult for a single assailant to subdue her given her jiu-jitsu training. In March 2016, 12 years after she disappeared, investigators revealed they had recovered DNA samples from Brianna's car. However, the results of the DNA tests were not made public. In July 2016, the farmhouse where her vehicle was discovered was destroyed in a fire. As of today, Brianna has never been found and the case remains unsolved. Paula Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudos Millian, hailed from Matarin, Monegasque. Her father, Leonardo Salazar, came from Tucupita, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. A year after Paula's birth, in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate with their child to Ecuador. They were seeking better opportunities for themselves and their daughter. Shortly after relocating to Quito, the capital of Ecuador, the family dynamic began to deteriorate due to various reasons. Andrina made the decision to separate from Leonardo and moved with Paula to Cuenca, Ecuador's third largest city. In Cuenca lived the mother of Andrina's best friend. She kindly offered them lodging while they sought a new place and means of employment. Meanwhile, given the circumstances and breakup, Leonardo decided to return to Venezuela. He eventually emigrated again, this time to Trinidad and Tobago. Leonardo had long been disabled. An accident during his youth had left his left arm entirely incapacitated. This disability made securing stable employment challenging even in Quito. Following her move to Cuenca, Andrina almost cut off communication with Leonardo completely. She informed him just once that she had secured work on a farm in Tabacundo. A few months after parting ways with Leonardo, Andrina entered into a new relationship with Washington Andreas Imero, a local Ecuadorian and owner of the farm where she worked. Washington came from a wealthy family. When Paula reached about 18 months old, Andrina moved in with Washington along with Paula. On April 7, 2019, Andrina and Washington welcomed a child together. This marked a period of happiness and unity for the family. However, Everything changed dramatically on March 27, 2020. An event occurred that profoundly impacted all involved parties' lives. During that period, the family was living well, enjoying each day on the farm, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. One day, decided to take to the flower plantations by car. However, en route, the girl became very ill. She felt dizzy and began to vomit. Left with no choice, Andreas stopped at a public restroom. As soon as they entered the restroom, vomited again. Andreas decided to leave her alone for a few minutes while he went back to the car to retrieve a change of clothes since hers were dirty. Upon his return, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl. He immediately pulled her out and attempted first aid before rushing her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old was handed over to medical professionals, she showed no signs of life. Doctors declared Paula deceased after performing an initial examination. They quickly noticed inconsistencies in Andrea's story. For instance, they observed bruises on her body and face that did not match his account. Medical protocols require doctors to notify police in such situations, which they did right away. Police arrived shortly thereafter and arrested Andreas as a suspect in Paula's death. Although he claimed she had drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy revealed a more troubling reality. Tests showed that Paula had been dead for approximately 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital. This contradicted Andreas' timeline of events. He stated that he had given her first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation just 20 minutes before taking her there. Moreover, the autopsy uncovered severe injuries, several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, all contributing factors to her death. It became clear that Paula's death was not an accident. Her small body bore numerous recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, Paula's father, learned of her death on March 33, days after the events transpired. His mother, who remained in Venezuela, informed him via phone. She had learned about it through a friend of Andrena's. After Leonardo left Ecuador, Rana began a new relationship and ceased all communication with him. Consequently, for 3 days, Leonardo was unaware of the tragedy. During that time, he could only see Paula through pictures sent by Andrena and their mutual friends. Additionally, Andrena blocked Leonardo on all social media platforms, preventing any form of communication with Paula. She also cut off contact with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. It is worth noting that she turned most of their mutual friends against Leonardo by portraying him as disinterested in maintaining a relationship with Paula. Despite these challenges, Leonardo was determined to learn about his daughter's death. However, Andrenia's family provided an alternative explanation for her passing. At that time, Ecuador, like much of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. Understandably skeptical about this claim, Leonardo began researching virus-related deaths in the country through social media and news sites. He quickly found no children among the few victims. With the assistance of his relatives, Leonardo continued his investigation. One relative sent him a newspaper article reporting the arrest of Enrana on suspicion of killing Paula. Persistently seeking answers, he called Enrana daily until she finally returned his call 10 days later. Because her lawyers had forbidden her to, the next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page with an acquaintance of his. This page was dedicated to Paula. They also set up an Instagram profile called Justice for Bola. The posts they published caused a huge backlash across social media, the main goal to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andrena called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin arranging her daughter's funeral. Even though the prosecutor working on the case asked for more time to investigate the body, Paula's funeral still took place on April 10, 2020. Andrena did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on Paula. Thanks to information posted on social media and shared by Andrena's friends, people in her circle contacted Leonardo and told him about Paula's sad life before her death. They sent Leonardo various pieces of information they had collected, most of which were isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio clips, and similar items. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, Paula had endured abuse from both her stepfather and her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in it. Everyone noted that Paula seemed happy and cheerful only when she was playing alone. In the presence of her stepfather, she appeared depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very fearful. At one point, the little girl told people she trusted that her mother and stepfather would beat her if she misbehaved. One day she even confessed that, as punishment, Andreas pushed her into a wall where she hit her head. Paula referred to her stepfather as nothing less than a monster, and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. She constantly had nightmares and suffered from insomnia at a young age. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time they moved into the stepfather's home, sleep alone when falling asleep. Paula often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. Additionally, her mother and stepfather forced her to manage on her own without assistance. Moreover, her mother, Andreina, had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old, which seemed unreasonable. Paula was compelled to prepare her own breakfast and dinners because her mother preferred to sleep in the mornings and take a break from caregiving in the evenings. She simply did not want to care for her daughter. Andreina did not mind that Paula had to handle the oven by herself despite the inherent dangers. At preschool, where Andreina had enrolled Paula, the girl frequently complained of pain in her legs and back, and often mentioned she could not walk. Her constant complaints, along with the bruises on her body, prompted the teacher to show her to doctors at a health center. After an examination, they concluded that Paula was being mistreated at home. The teachers then called a special police organization to investigate the abuse within Paula's family. Officials took up the case and decided to send Paula somewhere safe while they conducted their investigation. Consequently, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle's care and Drainer's brother. A hearing on the matter was set for December 4, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never appeared for reasons unknown. As a result, they scheduled a retrial for February 27, 2020. However, once again, all the teachers failed to attend. Consequently, the court had no option but to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents and return her to her mother. 1 month later, on March 27th, Paula passed away. The exact reasons why the teachers chose not to attend either hearing remain unknown. It is speculated that Andreina might have bribed or persuaded them that although Paula had some issues, it wasn't due to any wrongdoing by her parents. After Paula's tragic death, Andreas was placed in protective custody during the investigation. Soon appealed this decision, resulting in a hearing on June 12, 2020. At the hearing, which was held via video conference, the judge set aiding order and determined Andreas could be released to house arrest. However, during the hearing, Andreas announced that he was withdrawing his appeal. At that time, Leonardo was still conducting a social media campaign and asked his subscribers for financial support to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. His goal was to file a complaint against Andreina, Paula's mother, before it became too late. Andreina had not yet been charged and remained free. Fortunately, Leonardo managed to secure sufficient financial aid, as well as free legal advice from 2 Ecuadorian lawyers, Oswaldo and Alejandro. They generously offered him support and assistance with the lawsuit. Leonardo faced significant challenges to reach Ecuador. He had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela by rafting across dangerous waters and then travel across rugged terrain. Due to the pandemic, all regular maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed. Thus, only a few flights were available to a handful of countries. Once Leonardo arrived in Quito State, he crossed into Colombia over hazardous terrain. From there, he took a bus to Ipiales and continued onward through hills and plains until reaching Rumichaca Bridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Upon crossing into Ecuador, Leonardo took a cab to Quito. On June 30th, he immediately met with a lawyer upon arrival. The bereaved father filed a complaint against his ex-girlfriend, so she would also be considered a suspect in Paula's murder. By July 6, 2020, an indictment was issued against Enrana. She appeared in court, where it was decided that house arrest would suffice instead of full custody. In November 2020, the initial hearing for the case took place. Although a specific trial date had not yet been determined at that time, participation and discussions were intense. Leonardo's attorney voiced concerns about Andreana's potential escape risk, as she had previously attempted suicide using pills. The lawyer requested that Andreana be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge this request and also reduced her required court appearances to once a week instead of twice. However, shortly after, Andreana requested a reconsideration regarding the necessity of wearing the electronic bracelet. Consequently, another hearing was held on November 16th to review this decision. These developments inevitably caused delays in the trial proceedings, but eventually the judge set a new date for December. Despite limited media coverage of Andreas and Andreana's trial, much information found its way onto social media platforms. However, due to the pandemic dominating news coverage at the time, some details remained unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At that point, no final decision had been made regarding Andreana's alternative imprisonment options, while Andreas remained detained at the Regional Detention Center. The trial was conducted behind closed doors, with no media representatives present. Some participants attended via video link to ensure proceedings continued smoothly despite restrictions. According to testimony from the doctor who performed Paula's autopsy, several disturbing findings were made. Nearly all of her spinal discs had been rebuilt. She suffered broken ribs, some of which had fused naturally over time, and she displayed symptoms like nail stigmata, where nails grow into the skin, as well as bruises and scratches on her face and body. Furthermore, there was fluid accumulation in her lungs and serious injuries, such as scars on her head and lacerations on her colon. These medical findings suggested prolonged physical trauma. Before Paula's death and became critical evidence in understanding what transpired during her final days. The later injuries were what caused the infection to develop into sepsis, ultimately leading to death. The autopsy report confirmed that by the time took Paula to the hospital, she had been deceased for approximately 24 hours. The extent of her internal and external injuries revealed the severity of cruelty she had endured, as well as the negligence of her guardians, who never once sought medical attention for her. Additionally, was malnourished, underweight, and too small for her age, with clear mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, her mother, Andreana, tried to persuade family and friends that Paula had numerous psychological problems. She asserted that these issues led to self-harm behaviors which were attempts by Paula to attract attention. According to Andreana, when Paula's younger brother was born, Paula began lacking parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and attempted to manipulate everyone through crying. In October 2019, even though Paula was supposed to stay with her uncle per a board's decision, she actually continued staying at her parents' house most of the time and only slept at her uncle's house occasionally. This indicates that measures taken by authorities did not achieve their intended outcomes. Furthermore, it was established that in 2017, shortly after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, Paula began experiencing abuse, likely starting right after Andreana entered into a relationship with Andreas. At the trial attended by over 40 witnesses from the accusing party, it was confirmed that Paula endured abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the final hearing before the judge delivered the verdict, Andreana claimed full responsibility for the child's abuse. She admitted to beating Paula with a belt and sometimes using her fists. Through this statement, Andreana attempted to deflect blame away from her partner Andreas. She stated emphatically that he was innocent, that he had no involvement in the matter, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andreana also mentioned that she had reprimanded her daughter for causing issues with her new husband. Breaking up with him meant returning to the streets and losing the financial stability she could only gain through his support. Taking care of her daughter was not her main concern. Upon reviewing Paula's circumstances, the judges expressed concern for the couple's newborn son. However, they noted that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It is worth mentioning that Andreas opted to exercise his right to remain silent and has not commented on the incident since his arrest on February 3, 2021. Paula's trial concluded with both defendants being found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum penalty for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the prosecution sought the maximum punishment for the perpetrators. However, Considering an aggravating factor that Paula was just 4 years old and unable to defend herself, the chief judge sentenced Enrana and Andreas to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, convicted individuals have 3 days to appeal a verdict. The couple, as anticipated, indicated their intention to do so immediately. Despite being sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison, Andre remained under house arrest instead of being jailed directly. She utilized her opportunity to appeal, necessitating higher court confirmation of her incarceration sentence. Meanwhile, she continues to follow the previously imposed measures. This situation is markedly different from Andrea's case. He was detained upon his appearance at the hospital with a deceased girl. Public outrage has been palpable over Andreina remaining at large. Of particular note is Leonardo's anger and concern over her potentially evading justice. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.